Transforming forgotten neighborhoods into gold mines. That's what you're in for today. Welcome to episode 6 of Financial Freedom and the fourth episode in our Finding a Hotspot series, where we teach you the skills and knowledge you need to find the next real estate hotspot, the next BGC, the next Boracay, and the next big thing. Our mission is to empower Filipinos to build wealth and a brighter future. We are driven by a deep love for the Philippines and a vision of seeing the country and its people flourish. My name is Kane, and joining me today are my amazing co-hosts, Georgina and Justin. Say hello, you guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, and together we've spent years diving deep into the world of real estate, finance, and banking. Our goal? To equip you with the insights, strategies, and inspiration that you need to make smart, informed decisions on your investment journey. Now, before we dig deep into the topic for this episode, let's just do a quick recap on what we did on the first few episodes of this series. Justin?
Sure. So, in the first few episodes, we discuss what is a hotspot, the core concepts of these hotspots, different types of infrastructure, and in the very latest episode, we discussed planned job growth and affordability. Now, if any of that didn't make sense to you, we really encourage you to go back and watch at least the first episode, because it's sort of the foundational episode. It explains to you things like what is a hotspot, the core concepts, principles, all that good stuff. And we've also made this series to be watched in sequential order. So please go back, watch the first episode, and then the next ones, then come back to this one.
Awesome. So today, what are we going to be talking about? We are going to talk about urban renewal. So let's start off with a definition of what exactly that is so that we're all on the same page. So urban renewal refers to deliberate planned efforts by governments to revitalize, redevelop, or transform urban areas to stimulate economic growth, improve infrastructure, and also enhance the quality of life. So let's get this discussion started with me asking you guys a question. How do you think urban renewal increases real estate values?
I'll go first.
Yeah,
Okay. So to answer this question, we just need to break down what urban renewal projects could involve, right? And explore how each of their components contributes to increasing real estate value.
Yeah.
So first thing here would be infrastructure development. So urban renewals these projects, it often includes upgrades in roads. We're talking about roads, bridges, public transportation, utilities, green spaces.
Yeah.
So how exactly does infrastructure development improve real estate value? So technically, when areas get upgrades like this, it makes them more accessible and more convenient to live or work in. So take, for
Definitely.
example, shorter travel times. This attracts both families and businesses, increasing the demand for housing and commercial spaces. So we mentioned this on our episode 2 in our Hotspot series. So if you want to get into more details about this, go ahead and listen to our second episode of this series.
Definitely. We had a whole episode dedicated to infrastructure, so we go very well
Yeah.
in depth.
It's one of the strongest core drivers that we talk about, actually.
Yeah.
But another strong core driver that we talk about is planned job growth. Now, urban development, it very much ties in perfectly with planned job growth, because usually what happens when the government comes in, they plan for new commercial spaces, specifically in those locations, allowing businesses to come in and set up shop. Now, what that does is it boosts the jobs in that area, because businesses hire a whole lot of people. And then because those big businesses come in, it also boosts the prestige of that area, right? So
Definitely.
you have like big multinational companies with their big brands come in, and now that location's very fancy, it's very prestigious. You'll also see new shops and restaurants and entertainment values, because these commercial zones attract so many people that those businesses want to take advantage of that foot traffic. So all that sort of creates its own self-sustaining ecosystem where big businesses come in, that means like people and a whole lot of money. And then what that does is attract other businesses and attracts the government to improve the infrastructure because it's popular now. So it's a self-sustaining ecosystem when the government in these urban renewal plans create commercial zones.
Yeah, I'm thinking of when somebody wants to build like a Shangri-La, that's a whole lot more impressive for the area than something as opposed to like an Ibis hotel. They're both hotels, but one's significantly more impressive than the other. One's definitely more cause for celebration. And I think that people are more likely to want to be in those areas anyway because of the prestige. Like
and also especially how you mentioned it, Shangri-La. So I definitely want to be there, right?
Definitely, yeah. Another thing I want us to talk about is how urban renewal affects lifestyle features. We'll be doing a whole episode on lifestyle features as a core driver later in the series, so stay tuned for that. There's a lot to talk about, but today I just want to talk about just very quickly how lifestyle features make neighborhoods more attractive and functional. So like a lifestyle feature might be, for example, like a better park. It might be pedestrian zones. It could be community facilities. It's things that make an area a lot nicer to live in, more desirable to live in, and things that add value to the surrounding real estate as well. So this livability factor is really key in making neighborhoods more attractive, more valuable to prospective buyers, and also investors as well. So yes, like I mentioned before, lifestyle features do also help elevate the area's prestige, makes it more desirable for families, professionals, singles, investors, whoever you are. There's a lifestyle feature that probably appeals to you. And when they're developed as part of these urban renewal projects, developers can also demand premium prices for these properties. The buyers and the renters are more willing to pay for the convenient access to these amenities. People will pay for convenience. It's been shown time and time again. So the lifestyle features are a really valuable part of urban renewal for sure.
And good point, Georgina. And I just want to piggyback that and just want to introduce to our audience our next component here, very much related to your lifestyle features that you just mentioned, which would be the demographic shift.
Definitely.
So, this definitely plays a factor on how real estate values increase. More specifically, how so? So, urban renewal attracts higher income residents, right? It attracts businesses. So it shifts the demographic profile in this area. So how does this improve real estate value? Number one, very obvious, it increases spending power, purchasing power. So higher income residents bring greater purchasing power in this area. So this supports the local businesses there, and it increases the appeal for the area for investors when that happens. So as an effect, again, as a domino effect, this increases demand for premium properties, right? Because of the higher purchasing power. So affluent residents here, they seek higher quality housing. So this drives up prices for luxury units, condominium or residential units, and inclusive developments. What do you guys think?
I think that this is tied into the lifestyle features as well, right? Like rich people like rich looking things, and they want an area that looks nice, that feels nice, that smells nice. They want to go to their Starbucks in the morning, and they want to go to a bar in the afternoon, and they want to walk home while they're doing it. And you have to pay for this convenience. So urban renewal definitely is so key in changing demographics, in making it a poor area into a rich area.
I think a good example would probably be Clark, Pampanga at the moment, where there's heaps of new infrastructure and new projects being implemented there, that it's attracting that higher income residents, especially because, probably BPOs and multinational companies are going to come in and create those high income jobs, so that there's going to be a big demographic shift. People, probably Pampanga attracted, I wouldn't say lower income, but probably lower income. And now because of infrastructure changes and developers coming in, creating new commercial spaces and residential spaces, there's going to be a big shift from lower income to probably middle income people. And then what's going to happen then is, middle income people are going to come in, probably make the place popular. And then all the high income people are going to be like, well, we want to be where everyone's at. So let's also invest there. And also because the property values are going to increase as well, then that also attracts higher income people. So that's a good example of like a demographic shift in an area.
Yeah.
Right. And also, I just want to add to that, since we're talking about individuals, high income residents or high income individuals. So of course, when the demographics of an area is like this attracts premium brands.
It does.
So that's premium brands, that's restaurants, that's services, and this further increases and it drives up the property values in this area as well.
Yeah, it's a really positive cycle. Just one thing needs to change only for it to have a domino effect on everything else.
Yeah, exactly. And then one more thing that I want to mention is that for example, when these individuals are already in this area and then the businesses are already investing here, new commercial areas, there would be improved infrastructure, just as mentioned on our first component, because these populations are wealthy on these area. So of course, they would advocate for better public services in this area, right? Again, increasing the overall attractiveness on where people are moving in, the demographic shift of this area.
Definitely.
I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah,
it does. Yes, like people want
Absolutely.
access to nice things. They want public availability, even something as small as public toilets. Like it makes a really big difference to the way people see an area, and it makes people want to be in an area. Nobody wants to live in an area that's dirty, that's crowded, that's smelly. So like it's the improvement of these, usually invisible spaces actually has a really big effect.
I think that's a good time to shift, right? I think because I was thinking about the next thing that would increase property values due to urban renewal, and that's environmental remediation, right? Because what happens with these urban renewals, they're not always big projects. They can also be smaller projects that just enhance the environment of a location.
Yeah.
Right? And what that can do is if you have like a dirty lake, for example, or Manila Bay for a long time wasn't very usable.
Yeah.
if there's urban renewal in those areas, what can happen is a big shift in real estate values will increase because one, the perception. It's like, oh, okay, now this is nice and clean. It's good to look at. And with Manila Bay, for example, that's a lifestyle feature, ocean. Like every property that's near the ocean is quite valuable. And that's probably why they're doing those urban renewals in Manila Bay to take advantage of such a good ocean view, right?
Yeah, actually, now that you mentioned it, I just at first I thought it was like a useless effort, but then you mentioned this this environmental remediation, and it makes sense that technically what the government's trying to do here, more specifically on Manila Bay, is that they're helping the area near Manila Bay for the real estate values there to go up.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, it just popped out of my mind when you mentioned this.
I think. Sorry, you go, Justin.
Oh, I was gonna say, just on Manila Bay, they're expanding the land, right? So now that urban renewal allows them to add more real estate places because of the renewal project. Yeah.
Okay.
This makes me think of the scandal with the Olympics most recently. How in France, the water wasn't safe enough for the swimmers. I think something as big as the Olympics, obviously everybody wants to put their best foot forward, but Olympics is a good example of how an event can really affect property prices, because I'm sure prices in France went sky high thinking about buying property in the area. And the Olympics is such a big draw for tourism. People want to live near the Olympic arena because they know tourists are going to go there, right? So it's an example.
And millions
Yeah,
Millions, millions upon millions of dollars is invested into the country when they're
Yeah.
hosting the Olympics.
yeah.
It can
They put
definitely, if the Philippines ever hosts the Olympics, I definitely think it's a good time to buy real estate.
yeah, 'cause
Yeah.
there is
Didn't
so
we
much
host-
money.
Didn't we host was that the Olympics
The
or
basketball cup, the World
Oh
Cup.
yeah,
Oh,
World
FIBA.
Cup.
Yeah.
Okay, FIBA. Yeah, there we
Yeah.
go. Yeah, I'm not into sports. I'm sorry, you guys.
It's fine. It's fine.
But I don't
But
think
yeah.
that event caused enough of a
Enough. Yeah, it's not enough.
infrastructure change.
bigger.
But like the
Mm.
Olympics, just on a side note, Olympics like demands like heaps of infrastructure change, and like we
Yeah.
said, infrastructure increases real estate values. So
Does, yeah. Like so much money goes into getting a town or a city, ready to host an Olympics. There are so many standards that you need to meet. And yeah, the river, I think it's the Seine or the Seine River in France, I'm not sure. It's just an example of how how your immediate environment can really raise or break an area's reputation. Yeah, that is just such a prominent example in my mind to know that France sort of failed in that.
Yeah.
It hurts to think about. All that to say, environment is, I think we take it for granted. It's a granted factor that people take into consideration when they're buying an investment property. We just assume it's going to be taken care of. We assume it's going to benefit our property, not hinder it. So yeah, it's important to remember that environment plays a huge part in the value of our investment properties.
Yeah, for sure.
no,
Okay.
I think the Olympics is a very interesting point when it comes to environmental remediation, especially in France. But let's go back on topic, right?
Yeah, back to the Philippines.
Back to the Philippines. I think another thing that urban renewal brings in is enhanced public service. So
Okay.
by that, I'm talking about generally an urban renewal plan will include schools, healthcare facilities, and public safety is also an interesting thing that the government thinks about in these urban renewal efforts.
All things that attract people.
Yeah, absolutely. All things that, like, if you think about like a big school and a big hospital, what does that do? Attract people, but also
Yep.
creates jobs.
Yes.
So that there's an increase in economic activity just from those two things, which we talked about in an episode, by the way. Specifically, we talked about it in episode 2 of our Hotspot series, where we said that these schools, these big hospitals, schools, I mean universities. So when it comes to these public service facilities, the bigger they are, the more impact they have on real estate values. So that's an important thing to remember.
I think it's important to note, though, that those big public service facilities like universities, like hospitals, are very important in terms of the infrastructure and in terms of how infrastructure can affect property values. But more so, when we're talking about urban renewal, it doesn't need to be a university or hospital, because just updating these buildings can improve the quality of life of surrounding people. So people will be more interested in going to a school that has a brand new library, that has a brand new gym. These are smaller schools, so maybe they don't have the impact the same way it does in infrastructure. But in terms of urban renewal, it can help, increase demand for these schools. It can make better schools, better healthcare, increase the safety, increases standard of living of the area, helps change the demographic of the area, even if it's on a much smaller scale.
Yep.
Yeah, and that increase of people also forces the government to try, if there is like a high crime rate in that area that they're trying to do urban renewal, right?
Yeah.
They'll think about how to improve the safety, because there's so many people coming in and they don't want, people coming into an area that's unsafe.
Yes, even something as small as streetlights can make a huge difference to community safety. And that's all part of an urban renewal project.
Yeah, for sure. So technically, with everything you just guys mentioned, I just wanted to technically summarize it, that improving public services attracts individuals and businesses, and as an effect, this would create jobs as well, as we mentioned earlier, which would increase the economic activity and the real estate appeal in this area that the government's working on.
Yeah. Overall, urban renewal is a really positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just sorry,
For sure.
one last point is,
Yep.
we talk about infrastructure and commercial spaces, but these urban renewals, majority of them also create brand new housing and improve the housing in that area. I mean, for example, BGC is a big urban renewal project, and that involved residential and commercial spaces. And what do new residential units do? Well, they boost the demand for that location because people can actually live and invest in those places. And then it also, I mean, if it was nothing, improves the overall aesthetic of that area, right? And then also it just utilizes a space, urban renewal, that is a space that wasn't being used before.
Right. Okay. I want to piggyback on that, Justin. And I want to say that everything is contextual, right? So with regards to the housing development, not necessarily always. I just want to say that on the record. Because take, for example, if there's too much supply, again, we advise our audience to do their research.
Always.
But when there's an oversupply of housing in a certain area, it might not result to increasing the real estate values there. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. But again, it depends, right? Like
It depends.
it is very contextual.
Yeah.
I think if we're talking about urban development in terms of it was like a patch of dirt, or it wasn't very utilized, or in the case of like Pampanga where it's not very developed,
Right.
and then they've come in and they've developed it, that's when housing development can increase the overall property values of that area.
Yeah, I think BGC is obviously like our go-to example because it's like such a success story for the Philippines. But there are other examples of urban renewal that's happening even now here in the Philippines, right?
Oh yeah, let's talk about that. What do you guys think would be good examples of urban renewal projects here in the country, here in the Philippines?
Besides BGC.
Besides BGC, of course, it's
Yeah, no,
an
but
example. But yeah,
let's just see
let's
first.
see first. Yeah.
Okay, well, Justin, you're our resident BGC expert.
So, for those who don't know, BGC was a military camp
There we
back
go.
in the day, and then the government said, hey, it's not being utilized very well because we're not in war anymore. So they partnered with Ayala to then develop it. So I think they started in the 1990s in terms of this was just really strategizing the master
Starting to
plan of it. And then once they developed the master plan, then they got Ayala into it. And then, obviously now we know BGC as a very thriving commercial, residential, and lifestyle location.
Yeah.
Of every restaurant you can think of, luxury retail, the biggest businesses in the Philippines, practically everything, right? It is the main hub of the Philippines at the moment.
Yeah. So it's a prime example of what urban renewal could result to if the government plan or not. Yeah. Now, what about other examples? Because we've been using BGC in this entire series,
Yes.
all this time. But let's try to look at outside.
Yeah, let's look outside the city. Let's turn our attention to Clark.
Okay.
Specifically, Clark Freeport and the special economic zone surrounding it. I think this one is it's going to be very similar to BGC in that it also used to be a military base, right? And, spot a pattern when you see one. It's a military base and it was chosen to be a military base for a reason, right? Like it's a strategic location, it's got good access, easy to get to, easy to defend, yada, yada, yada. So back in the day, back in the 90s or wherever, when we were at war, it was for military use for the US Air Force. And now, obviously, we're not at war. So it has been revitalized into a development area. So it's going to have both commercial and residential there, I believe, right? That's what the special economic zone means. It's going to be both. The government has permitted it to be both. And that basically means that the businesses are going to be set up there will get tax exemptions, they'll get
Yep,
special
that's correct.
offers, special incentives to stay there and run their business, and that's fine. Everyone's welcome here in the Philippines.
Yeah, and as far as I know, there are infrastructure being built.
Yeah, they've got an airport.
An airport, right, and roads
Yes.
and other things like
All these key drivers that are really needed to make a new
yeah,
hotspot. Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, they're
If, um,
definitely.
I think another good example is the Cebu IT Park. Is
Oh
another
yeah, that's
it's
very
a really good
nice.
example of a urban renewal plan where the government went in and said, "Hey, let's turn this into an economic zone and try and attract commercial businesses." And then they teamed up with developers and then turned it into state-of-the-art commercial spot. BPOs came in, and
Yep.
then a lot of retail stores and restaurants and things like that to serve the increased foot traffic came in, and that's an urban renewal.
Yeah, so just to clarify, BGC was first, and then it was Cebu IT Park, which has been finished, and now Clark is still undergoing some urban renewal, right?
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So makes me think here that government planning definitely and with government support, this reduces risk,
Yeah, for sure.
right?
Big risk.
And yeah, because it paves the way for investors for significant returns, right?
Mhm.
So they're making these locations attractive for opportunities for investors, right?
Definitely.
Most especially those investors that are seeking for growth in the real estate market. Yeah, but then again, I think that's it for the components on how urban renewal can increase real estate values. Now, let's talk about the things to remember here when it comes to urban renewals, or like the core concepts that we have to remember. So the first thing, of course, as we've been mentioning and we've been talking about, urban renewals planned.
It is
It is
very
planned. It's not
planned.
natural. So there's government intervention here. It's deliberate and it's
Yeah.
intentional.
Yeah.
Like so. Yeah. Go ahead, Justin.
I was going to say it's like a business plan.
Yes.
Oh
they
wow.
have-
Yeah, that's a great way of explaining it.
they have certain objectives that they need to hit, right? They need to make sure that the economy is buoyant, meaning that it's growing and stable. They need to create jobs. They need to plan
Yeah.
for population growth and immigration growth. And then they also need to plan for, if they're doing an urban renewal project, infrastructure. So what infrastructure is going to come in? So they all have to plan that out probably years and years in advance before something can actually get built.
Yeah. And the questions that the government is asking themselves when they're building these types of areas are often very similar, if not the same questions that an investor would ask, right? Because the goal is ultimately the same. Both of you want to make money. The government wants their urban renewal plans to be profitable, and an investor wants their purchase to be profitable. So often the questions that they're asking themselves are the same.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe something like how would the government stimulate jobs? And for
Yeah.
businesses, it's the same thing. How
Yeah.
would be able to create jobs?
People are thinking about the demographic of the area. They're thinking about how they're going to get to and from work. They're thinking about reasons why people would want to live in this area that doesn't relate to their job. They're thinking about environmental factors like whether or not they get enough sun, or whether there's enough shelter from the sun, or whether there's green spaces to enjoy, whether
Mhm.
there's a cinema nearby. So these are all things that an investor would take
Right.
into consideration if they're doing their research properly. They're thinking about the target market of who's going to rent their property. These are questions that they should be asking themselves.
Right. But yeah,
Sorry.
this poses the question. Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
Well, that's funny because I have a question for you guys. Like, we discuss this topic of like urban renewal is planned, right?
Yeah.
Well, why is that important for an investor to know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was what I was gonna mention as well.
Right? Great.
Yeah. So technically, when this question popped out of my mind, I was thinking that this would be important for an investor if they're looking for an opportunity for appreciation,
Yeah,
The
yeah,
real estate
definitely.
appreciation, right? Because knowing where urban renewal projects are, right, it would help them identify the areas that will likely experience property value increases.
It's like I said, the government wants to make money and also investors want to make money.
Make
So
money,
they need to
exactly.
know where the properties are going to increase in value.
Right.
And that's the point, right? Because it's planned, the government will usually post it on their website, or they want everybody to know about it. Because also the government wants people to buy in that area, right? Like they want businesses and people to know that, hey, we have an urban renewal project. It's called BGC. Please buy there, or please set up shop there. So yeah, absolutely important
Yeah,
thing to know.
if investors don't buy there, the project will fail. So they're not keeping these urban renewal projects under wraps. Like, they're not secret. They're very publicly available if you know where to look.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to find.
Yeah, and also it's like the government spoon feeding investors here so that they could take advantage of early entry in
Yes.
the market.
Yeah.
Right. So when the government announces like projects like we're going to, like what Justin mentioned earlier, in Cebu IT Park and in Clark, that's an early advantage already, and that's why it's important for an investor to know about this, about it being planned. Yep.
They are begging for your money. They are begging. They're pleading. Like, please come by here. We need your funds to finish this project.
Right.
I think an important thing to also remember, right? Like, you know, they announce these things, and it can allow investors to also see the future and go, oh, okay, they're about to build BGC. Now, how does that negatively affect other areas? Because you know, like if you think about it, demand is only limited, right? There's not an unlimited supply, an unlimited amount of buyers that are going to buy in the Philippines. So when an urban renewal project, for example, BGC, pops up, well, that's going to affect everything around it, potentially negatively, at least at the start anyway. You know, we talk about how that can also positively affect areas, but at the start it's a new thing, so everyone wants to buy. That's going to draw away the demand from other places, and everybody's going to go to the new shiny objects, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It makes me think of Barbenheimer, you know, when Barbie came out and Oppenheimer came out.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
And people were like, which movie should I go see? And lucky it's a
Barbie.
movie you can go see, both. Barbie, obviously Barbie. But, you know, people were split. Which one should they go to? And it's the same, you know, there's only so much
demand. Yeah, that's true.
true.
Okay, I think we should move on to our next topic here, our next thing to remember.
I think there's one more. I think there's one more good.
Go ahead. Yeah.
And that because it's planned, that means that it's probably less likely to fail, because one, a lot of money is going to be involved in these urban renewal,
to fail,
right? It's when people put in that much money between the government and developers, chances are that they've strategically thought about how this area can increase economic activity and real estate values. And then also, if it fails, they're probably going to be like, well, we invested so much money. It can't fail. We need to invest more money. We need to figure this out and make it into something, because we've lost too much money if we don't. So I think that's a really important reason why we mentioned that urban renewal is planned, is because there's a lot of planning and a lot of money involved, and that can give, if you're an investor, I think that should give you a lot of confidence in these areas.
Are you saying that it's less risky?
Yeah, I think
less risk. Yes,
less risk for sure. Okay, all right. So now that we've talked about it being planned, let's talk about our next thing to remember. So things to remember, number 2 would be it starts from inward and then it goes outward. So this means that, inward to outward. This usually means that it starts from the center, then it goes outwards. Which one of you wants to go first here?
So I think I've got a good explanation for this, right? So usually what happens is the government creates centers first. So
Okay.
they create big economic hubs like Makati, like BGC, like Cebu, then Davao, right? So they create big cities, and then what happens is the government goes where everything's too centralized. There's too many people going into these hubs, and that's very risky. So
Yeah.
then they start developing outwards. So they go, how do we get people out of the city, because there's too many people now into the city? So then they start developing places like Clark, for example, or Subic, or things like that, to try and diversify that demand and those people. Because again, with any investment, like, diversity is key, especially when you're a country, and if something fails, like with BGC, you need backup, otherwise the whole country will.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Decentralize these places and encourage the development outwards.
I think that there's, like, the Philippines is such a small land size in country, but it's very big population, right? So, like, there's so many people here. Like, you are so crowded in Manila. You know, traffic's a nightmare. It's only a benefit to push people outside of the main city areas, and they make it pretty easy to get to, you know, like with the highways and everything. It's more or less a direct road, because they want to encourage people to get out of the city.
Right.
I just want to make one more point on this.
Go ahead,
Just from what I said, if you're thinking about it from an investor point of view, you have to think about it like, okay, well, once the government finishes, right, in these areas, they're going to diversify and want to build outwards. Well, if you're an investor, you have to be thinking about, where is that outwards? You have to understand that the government will first centralize, and then they will decentralize. And then as an investor, you have to I think it's a really good opportunity as an investor to take that opportunity of the decentralization and invest in these outer areas where the government will do urban renewal plans.
Yeah.
And sorry, just from like my initial hearing of this, you know, I'm automatically thinking that they're building more cities. Do you know what I mean? And that's not necessarily the case. Like, I know we've talked about Clark before, and that's obviously going to turn into, you know, this massive economic hub, and it's probably going to turn into another metropolitan city. But I'm also thinking of like Nuvali by Ayala Land. I don't know if you
In
guys
Laguna.
Laguna. Yeah. They're building like a really big, eco-friendly, sustainable community. And they did something similar with Leo in El Nido as well. So they're building like not a closed community, but they're definitely exclusive. You know, they're definitely well maintained. They're definitely meant to be a place where people can go and live a good life that isn't in a condo. Do you know what I mean? Like, these are house and lots that are being sold. It's a different lifestyle, and yet the intent is still the same. It is still designed to draw people out of the city. It's still designed to draw economic investment from big. It's still
diversification. Yeah. I know where you're going. Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, you know, they're diversifying not just in location, but also in lifestyle preferences as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, that was a really good example. I never thought about that. But now that you mention, I might buy a property in Nuvali.
I really like the idea of Nuvali. I've seen some pictures of their development. It's definitely going to be like a very healthy, well-being, you know, spiritual sort of location. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. All right. Thank you for that example, Georgina. Very, very good example. Okay, let's move on to our third thing to remember, which is that you should double check on how the government will execute the urban renewal to reduce
always need to double check.
To reduce your risk, right?
Right. So, Georgina, since you're so passionate about this, why don't you try to explain this to our audience?
Just because the government is involved doesn't mean it's a sure thing. Sure, it's probably more likely to succeed, but you need to do your own research. You need to make sure that things are suiting in with your portfolio. You need
Yep.
to double check the plan, the builders involved. You need to see when the turnover date is meant to be, or you just need to try and minimize all these setbacks and maximize your returns. As we say, getting in early is key to getting high return, but it's also the riskiest time to invest. So if you want to secure a profitable investment, you need to ask yourself some questions to check the viability of the project, right? So there's lots of different urban renewal projects. So we've got some examples of some questions that you might want to ask yourself, right? So firstly, what is the vision and what is the purpose of the project? So you need to make sure that this objective aligns with So you need to ensure that the project has a clear objective and that it aligns with government or regional development plans, right? Because if it doesn't, they're less likely to ensure that this project succeeds. So that means you could invest in a project and waste your money.
Yep.
Which sucks. You also need to think about who the stakeholders are and what their track record is. So this could be the developer that is, working with the government. It could also be contractors. It could be the government division that's involved. You want to verify their experience, their credibility, their reliability, because like we say, just because they're part of the government doesn't always necessarily mean it's a guaranteed job, doesn't mean it's going to be completed on time even. There are all sorts of delays.
You don't want to be buying a property because you heard of this rumor or this politician or the developer promised something and then nothing happens. And now what you just bought isn't very valuable.
Exactly. You also want to consider funding. Like I said before about, Cebu IT Park, governments are often begging people to buy in these areas because they need your funding to continue the project. So you might want a property or a project that has already got funding secured. And if it doesn't have funding secured, you need to think about whether or not you're happy to take that risk without a contingency plan, because there could be unexpected costs, unexpected delays, all of that as well. So if you're relying on this property, for example, for cash flow, but the turnover date has been delayed from 2027 to 2029, that's a pretty big delay that could cost you really severely for your portfolio. So that's something you need to consider as well. Another thing you need to ask yourself is if the project has necessary infrastructure and resources around it. We do say, infrastructure is a good indicator of a good investment, but what is the infrastructure that's being built? Is it a highway or is it just a simple road? Is it a bridge? You need to think about whether the infrastructure that's being built, if any, suits the needs of the project. And you also need to consider if the project addresses market demand. We always hear about an oversupply of condominiums in BGC. We always hear complaints that it's a bad investment. This is not necessarily the case if you do your research correctly. So you need to verify the information of the target audience, who's supposed to live there, what companies might want to get businesses there, and you need to check that for yourself, not just rely on what is being told to you, what is being hand-fed to you, because of course the developers want it to sound really good. Of course they want it to sound like a sure thing. You need to double check yourself.
Yep, for sure.
So I think it's really important as well is to make sure that you're sourcing your information from multiple sources, because you're investing a whole lot of money. So you can't just rely on, what one agent says or what one website says. You should double check and make sure that you're talking to multiple agents and you're checking multiple websites and government sources, because like I said, there's a whole lot of money, so you need to do your due diligence.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and you should apply that to every factor of your life.
Yeah, not just in real estate. Okay, all right. Now let's move on to our fourth thing to remember when it comes to urban renewal, which is urban development usually involves multiple car drivers. So let me start off with this, because a really great example, we mentioned this earlier, would be Clark in Pampanga here. It's a prime example of how multiple core drivers come into play when it comes to urban renewal. So take, for example, what happened in Clark. So there were massive upgrades like the Subic-Clark Expressway, right? And then there's a new airport that Georgina mentioned earlier, and there are new planned rail links linked to Manila, to
Mhm.
Metro Manila, right? And then there would be improved lifestyle features as well, which we will discuss in our future episodes. But technically, what happened here is that there's new residential communities, there's the new Clark City, things like that, new facilities and leisure facilities. Next thing, another thing happened is the planned job growth. We
Mhm.
discussed this as well in our previous episode. Please listen to that. But technically, what happened was that Clark became a special economic zone. So this attracted businesses like aviation, IT, manufacturing, tourism. So companies were incentivized through tax breaks. And lastly, private money. I love this core driver. We're going to talk about this in our future episode. So stay tuned. But technically, what happened here as well is that there were public-private partnerships that were brought in, private investments to fund the key developments in Clark, such as the airport expansion and the developments by Ayala Land or Phil Invest. So yeah,
This is why
go ahead.
urban development is probably planned job growth, because they work hand in hand, is my favorite core driver, because like you
Yeah.
said, you can't have planned job growth and urban development. So job growth mostly, but urban development usually comes with multiple core drivers.
Right.
And if you're an investor thinking about putting money in an area, I mean, it's so good to know that when a big urban renewal project like Clark comes into a location, infrastructure is going to improve. There's going to be increased lifestyle features. There's going to be more jobs in that area. And there's going to be a lot of money from developers and from the government. And all that, as an investor, makes me feel very confident that the real estate values in that area, when everything's done, is going to be great.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So yeah, but again, we advise our audience to always do your research, because not all urban renewal projects come with multiple core drivers. So always do your research.
I feel like that should be the tagline of our podcast. You know, Financial Freedom Philippines. Always do your research.
Yeah. Okay. So our next thing to remember would be that size matters.
So size definitely matters, and it definitely applies for urban renewal projects in particular. A really big urban renewal project can be a great indicator that it's going to succeed. We say a lot, you know, larger projects have larger impacts. This is because they have the resources, they have the government backing, they have the infrastructure investment needed to transform an area. You know, it's everything that you need for an attractive investment opportunity. So when you're evaluating an urban renewal project, probably bigger is better. You know, you need to gauge its ability to drive significant change to that area. Like we say, it needs to be more than just one core driver. It needs to be multiple. So why do you guys think size matters when it comes to urban renewal and property investing?
I'll go first. I can go first. Technically, it's because of the impact of the development. Impact at the development scale. So larger projects, of course, they're going to drive bigger or broader change. So urban renewal projects with a big size or a significant size, it's going to create a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Right? And what this means is that it's going to improve the real estate value of the surrounding areas. Take, for example, very obvious, BGC and Clark. So developments like in BGC, they transformed surrounding regions, and they attracted businesses and residents and investors from all over. So we would notice that on the surrounding areas and in BGC. And we're seeing this in Clark as well.
Yeah, so basically, like, the bigger the project, you know, the chances of the bigger the infrastructure changes, the bigger the highway is, the more likely that they're going to create bigger public facilities like hospitals and universities. And the bigger the project, the more likely bigger businesses are going to come in.
I'd also argue that the bigger the project, the more tempting it is for people to move out there as well, especially if they're moving away from a big city hub like BGC. if they're making a big lifestyle change, a big urban renewal project is going to be more tempting, more convincing for people to want to move over there. It's obviously the same for investors, of course, as well. You know, they are reassured that it's going to be viable long term. But, you know, these people who are investing in properties, they also need to rent them out. And people are more happy to rent in an area where they feel like had a big makeover, you know?
Yeah. Yep. And one more thing. Yeah, but just let me add this, Jessica.
You go.
Yeah, just this one, because I also want to add here why size matters is because you don't want to put your your egg in one basket.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Yeah. All your eggs.
You don't want to put your eggs in one basket. There we go. All right. Because when a project is big, right? When there's large developments, there would be a diverse investment opportunity. So there's opportunity for diversification. So take, for example, large developments would include residential areas, commercial areas, retail areas, industrial spaces. So investing in different property types within a massive project, it allows risk diversification.
Absolutely.
So true. So like, a big urban development with these mixes, that means that if, let's say, the residential is really bad, but the commercial is really good, well,
exactly.
They're still going to go up because there's a backup. Versus like, if you're just if there's just an urban development, it's just improving residential and it doesn't work, well, then the value of real estate isn't going to increase. So it's better. That's why it's always good to diversify your risk, and bigger projects do that because like BGC and Clark all include residential, commercial, real estate, industrial, all that good stuff.
Yep.
Probably because if one of those fail, at least the other things can help prop it up in case something doesn't work out as planned. Let's give some examples. What are some examples of large-scale projects and then small-scale projects?
I think we could probably skip the large-scale ones. We've talked about them a lot.
Yeah.
I think large-scale is like BGC, Clark, and then obviously they included a lot of infrastructure, lifestyle, all that good stuff. Let's go small then. What are some small ones? And then what I think our listeners should really look out for when we're mentioning these small ones is the fact that there isn't a lot of core drivers involved in the small ones.
So I'll start with one, the Escolta Street restoration in Manila. Escolta Street used to be known as the Queen of Manila's streets, and there's a lot of heritage buildings there, but they needed to be restored. Heritage buildings are obviously so important for cultural history, also for tourism as well. People like me who are interested in the design of heritage buildings, we like to go and see them as they were in their prime. So if they're not looked after, they actually just end up looking really run down and dirty and old-fashioned. So the restoration of heritage buildings is a small urban renewal project, and they also help, art galleries and things nearby as well, help them, give them work to do.
Right.
So that's two drivers there, urban renewal and also job opportunities.
I see. Yeah, maybe for construction workers, is that the job opportunities there?
Heritage buildings require specialist workers.
Specialists, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay,
but
I see.
I think a good point though is that it doesn't include a lot.
No, exactly. It's just the heritage buildings.
Major shift, and that's why we're giving these examples, right? Is because we're trying to make the point that a lot of smaller urban renewals, I don't think shifts the needle
Moves the
needle in terms of increasing real estate values, not to the point where investors excited about investing area.
No, but this sort of type of urban renewal project could also mean people are more likely to walk down that street to get a coffee because they think it looks nice. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it can be as well. Can be.
So it can be a good economic driver, even in such a small community.
Yeah. Again, do your research. Just a reminder for our viewers. Okay, I do have another example here. I saw this one in Iloilo. Have you guys been in Iloilo?
No, I've never been. I've heard of it. Never been.
Okay, Yeah, very nice place. Very nice place. I've also never been there. But secondly, so
Yeah, it's
I just
gorgeous
saw this
though.
online. It's gorgeous. It's really amazing. I have friends there. So what happened is that they revamped this area or small place called Libertad. Okay, so it's a small historical square, very similar to Escolta Street in Manila. So they focused on beautifying the plaza here with new landscaping, new lighting, and public seating. So the way that this impacted the area is that there's improved aesthetics, right? And it's the usability for locals. But honestly speaking, it hasn't sparked significant economic activity yet, or there's not much urban expansion.
No,
But it's an urban renewal project. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it's offering like an aesthetic place for people to go sit, enjoy their
Yep.
lunch, maybe as a meeting place for people to then go somewhere else.
Yeah.
But that's still really good for a community to have a plaza that they can base around.
Right. So maybe two core drivers, maybe number one, urban renewal, and then maybe improved lifestyle can
Yeah.
be.
Could be a
Right.
lifestyle feature, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's much better if you have multiple core drivers in an area. So maybe this one has to. Okay.
An interesting topic, while you guys were talking in terms of size. I think even with the core drivers, size matters, right?
yeah,
you
it
guys,
does.
you guys were talking like, okay, this includes multiple core drivers, but in the back of my head, I'm like, yeah, but it's such a small impact. Even if it is multiple core drivers, I don't think it's enough to increase real estate value.
Make an impact. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
not on
it
their
is
own,
important.
no.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that even with the core drivers, the bigger the infrastructure, plan job growth, whatever the core driver is, the bigger, the more likely the impact will be bigger.
I agree, definitely.
Because, sorry, we mentioned episode 1 that, or I think in episode 2 of the Hotspot series, how a lot of this is supply-demand metrics, right? Core drivers are basically supply-demand metrics where these core drivers drive demand. And like what I mentioned, the bigger the core driver, or the more involved, the larger the core driver, the larger the infrastructure, the larger the planned job growth, or the bigger the university, the more demand there is. So it's very important to remember that even though, we mentioned these small urban development projects do involve and improve multiple core drivers, they don't necessarily improve demand big enough for it to increase real estate values.
So like this plaza, for example, is definitely an urban renewal project. Is it enough to make people want to move there? Probably not. Is it a core driver? Yeah, but its impact is really small. So probably not relevant.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's move on to our last thing to remember, which is that government usually involves major developers. Major, not minor.
Yes. So Philippines has a lot of major developers with quite a reputation, and developers, as far as I'm aware, aren't really popular elsewhere in the world. Australia doesn't really have developers in the same fashion that the Philippines does.
I never knew.
Yeah, it just operates a little differently, but obviously, the name developer is self-explanatory. So like they're property developers, but usually in Australia, a property developer is a specialist in either residential or commercial, not usually both. Whereas here in the Philippines, they are usually both. So, fun fact for you.
A monopoly, you could say, in terms of developers, where in other countries usually they're a lot more diverse.
Yeah.
You find, I'm guessing here, so please don't crucify me, but probably 60% of developments here in the Philippines are between Ayala and Mega World. That doesn't happen in places like Australia and America.
No, yeah, for sure. And these developers are so massive here in the Philippines. They're absolutely integral to a successful project. They're so important to getting the local economies running. They have so many resources. They have such credibility. You know, you think to yourself, oh, I want to buy an Ayala land property. I want to buy a Mega World property. You don't think, oh, I want to buy a condo in Eastwood. I want to buy a condo in...
The brand.
Yeah, it's the brand. It's definitely the brand. So it's really important to remember that the government does usually pair with a reputable developer, but you should still research the developer to ensure you know who they are, what they're doing, other projects that they've done as well.
On the process. So usually what happens is the government will handle the infrastructure and the planning. This is in urban renewal. And then they get the developers to then build the residential, commercial, and retail spaces. So that's usually the collaboration when it's a big urban development. And I think that's a point as well, is that when the government and developers team up, it's usually big. You're not going to find the government and developers teaming up on a small project like the small project that we mentioned, because there's no point.
Yeah, for sure. But in saying all of that, developers are so important here in the Philippines that we're actually dedicating our very next episode to talking about their economic impact, aren't we?
Yeah, for sure. So just to give a recap on everything that we've talked about urban development. So technically this involves deliberate efforts by the government, specifically by the government, to revitalize urban areas through infrastructure development, new commercial zones, lifestyle enhancements, and improved public services. And these projects increase real estate values by improving accessibility, and attracting businesses, creating jobs, and enhancing livability. And for the investors, urban renewal offers opportunities for growth, but due diligence, again, is critical. So consider the project scale, consider the funding, consider the stakeholders, and the execution plan that ensures minimize risk and maximize returns. Okay, I guess that is it for our recap.
Now, if you're ready to start your real estate journey in the Philippines, the best first step is understanding your budget and how much a local bank will lend you. If you'd like to know that and get access to credible real estate agents who work with the biggest developers in the Philippines, sign up for our free borrowing power consultation. We'll go through your finances and give you the most accurate estimation of what you could possibly loan from a Filipino bank.
And if this stuff seems interesting to you, be sure to join our real estate community group. There'll be a link down in the description below. You'll gain access to our exclusive resources that can help you make better strategic decisions. Plus, you'll be surrounded by like-minded people. You can talk to them, you can ask them questions, you can ask us questions, and together we can all work together to build wealth and strive for financial freedom.
All right, and also subscribe to our channel so you don't miss your chance to uncover the secrets to finding hotspots. Again, sign up for our free borrowing power consultation. Join our online community group, and subscribe to our channel. That is all that we have for you. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast, and see you on our next. Thank you guys for listening.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.